One of the most interesting rabbit holes on the internet is the origin of popular memes. Despite how innocuous these ubiquitous images may present themselves to be, they often seem to trace back to the darkest corners of online spheres. Numerous mainstays of popular culture are ripped from or inspired by disturbing, fringe content found on the worst recesses of the internet. But for all the memes that are propped up by questionable backstories of obscure internet depravity, one case in particular stands out, except its perturbing origins don't lead back to fringe reaches of internet troll culture, but instead to the real-life story of one of the deadliest mass attacks in US history. Patrick Wood Crusius was born on August 27, 1998, to a family of two constantly warring parents and two siblings, an older half-brother named Brian and a twin sister named Emily. Growing up, his father was heavily addicted to drugs, often abusing alcohol, benzos, antidepressants, Vicodin, and ADHD pills. As the dependency overtook his behavior towards the rest of the family, Patrick's mother, who'd likely seen the horrors of addiction firsthand working as a registered nurse since 1990, banished him to live upstairs away from the kids until he got his life together. When Patrick was about 12 years old, his mom Lori and his father Brian finally filed for divorce in 2011. In 2014, his father wrote a self-published memoir entitled Life Enthusiasm, A Path to Purpose Beyond Recovery, chronicling his past with his 40-year addiction to drugs. In one passage of the book, he claims to have met Jesus, saying, "Christ greeted me with a smile. He pulled his robe aside with his right hand to reveal the flaming heart of love and compassion. He addressed me thus, 'Brian, you have chosen the path of the heart.'" Despite the dubious truth behind his memory of this, his work as a licensed professional counselor left a profound impact on some of his patients, namely musician Eric Keys, who Crusius treated for PTSD after he was shot by someone he identified as a crazed fan in 2012 and created a GoFundMe page to raise money for his care. On his now-removed website devoted to recovery therapy, Crusius says his mission is to bring the highest level of care possible to any who wish to be free from addictions, codependence, PTSD, and trauma. By the time his parents had split, Patrick had already come to be known as a lonely kid, mainly relying on his computer to occupy his hours. During most of his school years, he suffered from chronic neurological and mental issues that resulted in him being placed in special education classes, and at one point was diagnosed with a schizoaffective disorder that likely stunted his development. In 2013, Patrick began to attend Liberty High in Frisco, where his mom taught health sciences when he was enrolled, but resigned after only 1 year. Throughout his time at Liberty and later Plano Senior High, his peers and classmates immediately felt that there was something off about him. Patrick was a habitually weird kid, mostly sitting alone at the back of the bus and sometimes going on rants to himself about any of the other students who were in the school band or played on sports teams, seeming to really hate the popular kids at his school. Furthering his peculiarities, he was often described as standoffish and aloof, rarely interacting with anyone beyond the bare minimum. Most of his social interactions would come from his sister and her friends, who he'd occasionally walk with to school, but would walk either way ahead of the group or way behind them, never saying a word. In class, he'd take charge of the room and was remarkably strong-minded and nearly arrogant, in contrast to his usually timid demeanor. But he'd become quite furious when other students refused to listen to him, driving many to shun him from group projects, fearing his irritable outbursts. Kids would often pick on Patrick for him speaking in an unusual way and wearing old, haggard, hand-me-down clothes. During one particularly rough period in high school, Patrick ran away from home. His family quickly called the police and reported him missing, only to see him curiously returning home in less than 30 minutes. In school, Patrick's behavior only worsened as time progressed. While he was not exactly ever the ideal student, he was once suspended for being caught openly writing out a list of girls that he wanted to rape and murder. Apparently not seeing the issue with this, or simply not caring, Patrick never bothered to hide this list from any of his classmates, nor did this halt his creepy and questionable actions. After this incident, the majority of his classmates stopped looking at or talking to him, not that he made the effort anyway. But for all of the warning signs in this one instance alone, nothing was ever really done to flag him or prevent something similar from happening again, beyond his suspension. In 2017, Patrick graduated high school and began attending community college, which he later dropped out of, deciding to move in with his grandparents while taking classes at Collin College. As long as he obeyed certain rules like not leaving the house late at night or being on the computer constantly, his grandparents were fine with him living there. And while he had no problem following the first rule, Patrick was beginning to involve himself increasingly more in online culture. Deciding to look for a job, Patrick created a LinkedIn profile for himself, but reading through its contents, it's unclear why he bothered doing so, as the entire account painted him in the least favorable light possible. Saying of his current job working as a bagger at the supermarket, he said, "I'm not really motivated to do anything more than what's necessary to get by. Working in general sucks." He unconfidently included, "I spend 8 hours a day on the computer, so that should count for technology experience, I guess." And under skills wrote, "Nothing really." Trying his luck to find the young love he'd missed out on before, he began asking out the girls he'd gone to school with, but given his little list, this attempt was already doomed from the start. Nevertheless, he opened an account on Instagram and used that to ask out one girl he'd attended middle and high school with. Obviously, she chose to ignore his message, saying that it just seemed like a bad idea, and unbeknownst to him, she was one of the students who'd reported him for jokingly telling girls that he was going to kill them. With all of his time spent online, it's a natural extension that Patrick eventually created accounts on most of the usual popular social media platforms, such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Much like everyone nowadays, he used his presence on these apps to promote his opinionated political screeds in the most incendiary ways. Initially, he appeared to just be a normal Republican, posting pretty usual run-of-the-mill takes that never really raised any eyebrows. This, sadly, would not last long. As Patrick began to see a demographic shift in his hometown, he slowly grew hateful. When he was in his younger years, the population of Allen, Texas was 83% white, but as he grew older, these numbers shifted, with increasing Latin and Asian populations bringing that demographic down to 59% white. And when Donald Trump ran for president in 2016, Patrick quickly gravitated towards his campaign and took to social media to obsessively vocalize his support for him, posting hashtags like Build the Wall, No Sanctuary Cities, Keep Gitmo Open, and Ban Syrian Refugees. Around this time, he also began to use a profile picture of Dylan Roof, another Southern-born shooter who targeted the Charleston church in his mission to take the lives of as many black people as he could. It's clear here that Patrick was already admiring mass killers like this, and his natural progression of this was to start gearing himself up. Whether or not he was planning to carry out a similar attack by this point is murky, but it's likely that he was intending to do something drastic. So he went out and purchased a WASR-10 semi-automatic rifle, though he later laments in his manifesto about regretting buying this particular weapon due to its tendency to overheat. In an effort to combat the possibility of his gun heating up too much, he also obtained heat-resistant gloves. Online, he bought around 1,000 hollow-point bullets after researching ammunition to find out what would be the most destructive in an attack. After discovering that her developmentally stunted son had gotten his hands on a lethal weapon, Patrick's mother became concerned and raised the alarm to police, warning them that he was likely a safety threat to himself and others around him. Her call was transferred over to a public safety officer who asked her if her son had ever threatened to harm himself or anyone else. Now, it's important to stress that he actually had, which made her response that she didn't believe so all the more peculiar. Whether this was a simple mistake on her part or she was never notified by the school of her son's expression of psychotic sadism, countless lives could have been saved if she'd said yes here. But without that, Patrick was well within the law to purchase and own that firearm, so there was nothing to be done but leave him be. But before the officers hung up the phone, she told them the name that they would soon come to know all too well. During this time, Patrick was falling into the more extreme recesses of the internet, namely a site known as 8chan. Now, 8chan is generally considered to be the niche-er, more volatile version of 4chan, and much like 4chan, it hosted different image boards on which creators could publicly post. Unlike 4chan, each of these boards were moderated by its own creator, with little administrative oversight, quickly lending itself to chaos, extremism, and echo chambers. Living up to its self-professed reputation as the darkest reaches of the internet, 8chan rapidly devolved into political extremism, mass killers, and as most things seem to drift online after a while, child pornography. As a result of all that controversy, Google tried to filter out 8chan from its search engines back in 2015, though to little success, as this only elevated 8chan's growing status as the wild and free harbor for outcasts. Ironically, Google's attempt to remove extremists from the site only impassioned them more to flock to their only remaining bastion on the internet. This time it would be without any new, less extreme people coming in, intensifying the echo chamber it had already been cultivating. Now, to understand much of the culture and ideology of 8chan throughout this period, where Patrick became involved with it, we have to first understand one of the most infamous mass shootings in recent history. On March 15, 2019, Australian-born Breton Tarrant loaded up his vehicle and drove to the ller Mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand. He instantly opened fire on the worshippers inside the mosque before running out of ammunition in less than 30 seconds. The gunman then returned to his car to retrieve another weapon, and re-entered the mosque and resumed firing on those within. Breton's decision to livestream the entire massacre to Facebook Live via a helmet cam he was wearing gave a presentation that made the shooting look almost exactly like a first-person shooter game. Setting the whole attack to music not only upped the eeriness of the broadcasted recording, but also served as a point of inspiration for several future copycats. After gunning down numerous innocents at the ller Mosque, he hopped back into his car and drove to another nearby mosque, the Linwood Islamic Center, where he fired at 2 more people and then shot out the windows. Someone inside the building rushed outside and picked up one of his shotguns, chasing him away before 2 police officers continued the pursuit and then arrested him. Once he was taken into custody, Tarrant revealed to police that his plan was to burn down the mosques after he'd finished his attack, and was on his way to target yet another mosque before he was apprehended. And in the days after the story hit the headlines, many people uncovered the 74-page manifesto he had written and emailed out to more than 30 recipients, and posted online minutes before the attacks began. His manifesto was entitled The Great Replacement, in reference to the alt-right conspiracy whose origins date back to the late 19th century. Originally espoused by the French author Renaud Camus, the Great Replacement theory postulates that white French and European populations are being systematically replaced by non-white ethnicities, which he perceived as inferior and malignant. His popularized idea gave rise to the push for the eugenics movement, which supported the forced sterilization of black people, the mentally ill, and other marginalized groups, who were all deemed unfit for reproduction. In modern day, this theory still persists in the core principles behind many white nationalist groups, xenophobic ideals, and some especially radical fringe anti-immigration movements. And as Tarrant integrates these racist ideas into his manifesto, he also notably intentionally inspires a wave of copycats. He slides in his fear-mongering call to action, where he directly encourages like-minded sociopaths to act on their shared ideology. Immediately following news of the shooting, Brenton Tarrant became a hugely popular and venerated figure among certain fringe boards on 8chan, just as he browsed those same boards, admiring other masculars and slowly becoming more politically charged and extremely deranged. As Tarrant, and in particular his manifesto, quickly gained prominence on the site, many posts and image macros were spread on there, encouraging people to beat his high score and surpass his body count. And soon, he would inspire a wave of similarly ideologically radical killers. As Patrick got deeper into the forums, he began spending hours browsing the site daily, excited to have finally found a community where he could be surrounded by a like-minded group of people who shared his fringe views. And as he got more involved, he started to admire these murderers more and more, eventually coming to the final decision that he would carry out an attack of his own. But there was one thing left to do before he could. See, Patrick had become thoroughly obsessed with Brenton Tarrant, but for all the time he spent combing the internet for his manifesto, he couldn't seem to find it on his own. So his sister sent it to him, not understanding why he was so desperate to have his hands on it. And once he read through it, he was inspired in the worst way. Patrick wanted badly to follow in Brenton's footsteps, but didn't hold the same hatred for Muslims that Tarrant did. But he really hated the Hispanics in his hometown. Thus, he began writing a manifesto of his own, which he entitled The Inconvenient Truth, likely ripping the name from the 2006 climate change documentary of the same name. Later, he posted the finished 4-page manifesto to 8chan's/poll board. Essentially, the contents of his manifesto can be summed up as a less thought-out copycat of Brenton Tarrant's The Great Replacement Manifesto, and it's quite difficult to skirt this comparison given the nature of not only his attack, but the fact that he literally opens his paper by saying, quote, "In general, I support the Christchurch shooter in his manifesto," and his ideology doesn't differ at all from Tarrant's in any substantial ways, except for his less refined articulation of it. Basically, he spends the entirety of the manifesto blaming mostly Latinos for what he perceives as the Hispanic invasion, but as the writing progresses, it's easy to realize that his beliefs on this are paper-thin. He speaks of, quote, "the extensive evidence these Hispanic invaders cause and will cause," but proceeds to cite almost no evidence indicating this. He mentions this in a way that implies he is ignorant to evidence that lends credence to his claim rather than bringing it up in a way that suggests his audience is already aware of this proof. Over the course of the quite low-effort paper, he really never delves into anything beyond a surface-level circular argument that chases its own tail. And it seems he only barely believes any of the xenophobic ideas Tarrant inspired in him, and even directly acknowledges this by saying, quote, "Actually, the Hispanic community was not my target before I read The Great Replacement." For the heinousness of the act he committed in the name of this ideology, he seemingly put no thought or deeper in sophistication into why he believes what he does. There's no critical thinking for Patrick, which makes his series of decisions here all the more perplexing. Despite investing no reason or real conviction whatsoever into his ideology, he feels compelled to carry out a politically motivated hate crime spree. With this detail alone, you begin to recognize that Patrick is not actually far-right or racist or even anti-immigration. He's just hateful. He's clearly always wanted to commit a despicable act of apparently massive proportions. Before, this manifested in him wanting to rape his classmates. Now it manifested in him wanting to kill Hispanics. Each time he hates some subset of the people around him first, and then slaps some label on his motivation to justify why. Although he identifies himself more with the conservative side of American politics, he mainly goes after the whole government and seems to be more anti-establishment than anything. Now remember, when it comes to politics, I actually just agree with you. But in particular, he especially rails against the Democratic Party, theorizing that America will soon become a one-party state, and the liberals will take over the country. None of these theories have actually crystallized into reality, perhaps not surprisingly, and the demographics for Hispanic support are definitely far from unanimous in either direction. It also doesn't look like we're trending towards a single-party state right now, or ever, but hey, maybe his screed will age well in like 50 years or so. On August 23rd, 2019, 1 week after his 21st birthday, Patrick was sitting at home, alone and unemployed, hypocritically living off of the welfare he resented others for taking. Figuring that now was as good a time as it was ever going to be, he prepared to carry out the attack that would prove to be one of the deadliest mass shootings on Latinos in American history. In his car, he loaded up his rifle, along with 1,000 hollow-point rounds, and on top he carefully placed his protective gear, the heat-resistant gloves, and some earmuffs. Around midnight, he carried out the final item, the most important item to him, his laptop, keeping it with him in the front seat and pulled out of the driveway. As he began to drive, Patrick seemingly relaxed completely, and made his way out of the city and right onto the highway, on an all-night mission to drive 650 miles from the house to El Paso, Texas, trying to get as close to the Mexican border as he could. Throughout his overnight trip, he stopped twice at different gas stations, each time to fill up his car's tank, down an energy drink, and sit in his car for a minute browsing 8chan. Around 8 o'clock the following morning, Patrick arrived in El Paso at last, pretty fatigued from driving basically the whole night and missing a day's worth of sleep in the process. On top of that, he was incredibly hungry, having eaten nothing, fueled only by Monster. So he spent some time aimlessly driving around El Paso, seemingly with no particular goal in mind, choosing to stop at a pizzeria he'd apparently visited prior, wanting to get one of his favorite orders for the last time. But seeing as how it was fairly early in the morning, the pizzeria was unfortunately closed, leading Patrick to leave and simply drive off to the Walmart. At about 9 a.m., Patrick drove up to a Walmart near the Cielo Vista Mall on the east side of El Paso. Around 3,000 people were shopping at the city's more popular Walmart location, and since the store was very close to the Mexican border, many would cross the boundary to shop there, earning it the nickname the Juarez Walmart. Unsurprisingly, this piqued his interest, though it's uncertain whether he'd already set his sights on this Walmart knowing this beforehand, or he'd realized it upon arriving. But by this point, he'd clearly decided to select this location as a target. Donning an unassuming all-black t-shirt and cargo pants, Patrick parked his car and hopped out to make his way towards the store. For the moment, he just wanted to get a feel for the place for a bit. Wandering around the Walmart for about half an hour, he felt out the place's current demographics and mostly tried to learn the layout of the building. Once he'd finished scoping out everything he deemed necessary to get a read of the store, he headed back to his car, still hungry but apparently not affected at all by the usual expected nerves. Realizing that he'd probably need to eat something, Patrick once again walked back into the store where he bought an orange and casually loitered around the grocery cart section for a bit while eating it, watching the people he was planning to brutally gun down in broad daylight walk past him without any idea of his intent on the horizon. After finishing the orange, Patrick headed back to his car where he would wait around for about an hour, likely getting himself prepared mentally for what he was about to do. Now it was around 10:15 and Patrick was browsing 8chan on his laptop while sitting in his car, but this time he was no longer content to passively read the threads posted by others. Instead, he decided to anonymously start one of his own. A thread which he called It's Time, with vague text implying he was going to commit some attack, but never revealed the details. In his post, he attached a PDF file, which was supposed to be a digital copy of his manifesto, but instead he ended up accidentally attaching a disciplinary note from his college that he'd received for an instance of him showing up to class drunk. Almost immediately realizing his mistake, he quickly posted a reply to the original and uploaded the intended PDF that actually contained his manifesto. His original post only garnered a handful of responses, the first of which was another Anon replying to the thread, joking that 8chan is a board of peace and doesn't condone violence, a satirical mimicry of those who suggest that Islam is a religion of peace. Another response agreed with Patrick's intent, favorably replying every Shabbat to express that they wanted killings of this nature to happen every weekend. Likely because he already saw the replies to his post drying up, Patrick shut off and closed the laptop, stashing it away at 10:37 a.m. to gather his materials. He walked around to the trunk of his car, opening it up to pull out the safety glasses, gloves, and earmuffs. Then he quickly picked up his rifle, cocked it, and opened fire towards a few shoppers milling about the parking lot, instantly killing a woman pushing one of the shopping carts. Right after, he started firing on a girls' soccer team who were running a fundraising event outside of the store. Fortunately, the store manager had already caught sight of this unfolding. The alert made evacuation from the Walmart a priority for everyone still within, and taking cover for those in no position to leave safely. Many shoppers quickly fled across the street to the local mall or desperately ran to hide under tables and behind shipping containers outside of the building. However, many more were simply stuck inside, and for some, this position would prove fatal. After roughly a minute and a half of opening fire in the parking lot, Patrick continued on his rampage, walking into the store through its west entrance. He was caught on CCTV cameras calmly entering through the front doors with his rifle. Upon seeing a group of adults helping out with the aforementioned soccer team, he shot at them, injuring their coach and killing his father. Still seemingly at ease, he proceeded to walk around the store when an old man, probably hard of hearing and without any idea of what was happening, came out of the restroom. When he saw Patrick's gun, he tried desperately to flee. Unfortunately, Patrick was not swayed and emotionlessly shot him in the back of the head, stepping over his fallen body to march on. Then he headed towards another section of the Walmart with a bunch of fast food stores while shoppers continued to scream and hide. As Patrick was slowly walking by, he left many of these people, just going straight past them, either deliberately choosing to ignore them, thinking they were dead, or not seeing them at all. Continuing to shoot, he made his way through the registers as a group of cashiers attempted to flee the scene. But one of them tripped and fell, landing on the ground and raising his head to see if Patrick was still there. He was, and shot right through the cashier's head before pointing the weapon at another woman hiding behind the counter and shooting her too. Moving towards a small branch of a local bank contained within the store, he saw a man hiding behind a column and shot him point blank before shifting towards the other men in the area behind the counter, firing at both of them. As he turned to head back to the main store, a man by the name of Andre Anchondo threw himself on top of his wife and baby to protect them, as Patrick rampaged through and fired at them, In doing so, he saved his baby, but one of Patrick's shots caught him in the back and killed him. And after leaving a huge trail of destruction behind him, Patrick began shooting at anyone who was hiding that he could even get a glimpse of as he moved east. Eventually, he made his way over to the eastern doors of the Walmart opposite from the point he'd entered from, and simply walked out the door. Making his way out to his car, Patrick fired his last shot towards another car in the parking lot, killing the married couple inside. And this final bullet ended his killing spree, a violent storm that took the lives of 22 people and injured 23 more in under 10 minutes. Before police arrived, he hopped into his car and drove off towards the I-10 highway for a quick and easy getaway. Shortly after he left, first responders rolled up to the scene. Among the vehicles there, they included ambulances, the local police department, the Texas Rangers, the FBI, and the ATF. All of them showed up to find the aftermath of what later became known as one of the deadliest attacks in recent U.S. history, with 20 victims dying right on the scene and 3 more succumbing over a period of time afterwards. Additionally, most of the victims, as Patrick had obviously intended, were Hispanic, though there seemed to be no consistency among their varied ages. As police cleared the crime scene, they evacuated the nearby mall just in case, as they weren't sure if the killer was still in the area and remaining active. Little did they know, their gunman was already long gone, though his next move would quickly reveal himself. In situations like this one, it usually follows that most killers, after having taken multiple lives and escaping immediate arrest, would do their best to vacate the area and flee the state, sometimes even the country, for an attack of this scale. Patrick, however, was not most killers, and rather than getting back onto the highway as it originally appeared he would, he instead turned the car around and headed back towards the same Walmart. On the way, he was stopped at a busy intersection where there were some police and ambulances halted behind him. Stopping his car, Patrick exited the vehicle, coming out with his hands up and calmly informed the cops that he was the shooter they were looking for. As the scene unfolded, other drivers at the intersection were able to record him being arrested on the spot and taken back to the police car. Once in custody, Patrick immediately waived his Miranda rights and confessed to everything, admitting that he'd been targeting the Mexicans at the store. The police soon began to suspect that he hadn't planned on making it out of his attack alive, a sentiment echoed in his original Manifesto post. In fact, he'd previously written within the Manifesto that surviving and being captured would be a much worse fate, and oftentimes similar perpetrators would take their own lives or otherwise be killed over the course of their rampage. Patrick spoke of not wanting to survive on the account that he couldn't bear to see his family come to despise him, but for all his supposed willingness to face death, he seemed to especially fear the death penalty. Shortly after the news hit, users on 8chan came to realize that Patrick had indeed been planning to commit the violence he'd previously posted about. And while some commenters voiced their support for his actions, the site's moderators hurriedly scrubbed the post and manifesto, getting rid of it in the hopes that it would save the site from coming under even more fire. Needless to say, their efforts were not fruitful, and other forum users quickly re-uploaded it, though due to how low effort the manifesto seemed, many doubted that it was real. Other commenters were more impressed with Patrick's kill count, marking at the size of the numbers, asking, quote, "Is nobody going to check these incredible digits?" Following the events of the shooting, Cloudflare, their anti-DDoS application, terminated their protection of 8chan, leaving the website security vulnerable to attacks. Not long after, Voxility, the provider that 8chan rented their servers from, discontinued their service, taking the site offline. But all the controversy that 8chan was stirring up made it attractive to others who wanted to chase the clout of its hate wave, and the website soon came back, now on a Russian hosting provider, and under a different name, 8kun. But for all of the fringe extremists that supported Patrick's attack and referred to him as our guy in posts, the majority of the forum users tried to retroactively reject and condemn him. Although he wanted desperately to become a martyr for the community he spent most of his time in and got most of his inspiration from, they didn't take to him in the same way they did to Breton Tarrant. On the law enforcement side of the response, the FBI raided the home of Patrick's grandparents the day after the attack, given that it was his last known address. When the agents appeared at their doorstep, Patrick's grandfather got into an altercation with one of them and told him to get the hell out. Also, his grandparents, both in their mid-70s, refused to talk to the media at first. But the next day, they relented and made a brief statement saying that they were devastated and praying for the victims. 2 days after the shooting, an employee from Walmart's corporate side sent out a memorandum to their whole e-commerce division, urging them to strike to try to force the company to stop selling guns. Walmart itself sent out a memo to all of their stores, ordering them to remove any posters or signs that suggested violent themes or depictions of aggressive behavior. In an effort to help the victims, they also put together a fund of $400,000. Then, after a month of the strike, the company did announce that they would stop selling ammunition for rifles and handguns in their locations within America, and prohibited any open carrying of weapons in their stores. President Trump spoke out about the shooting as well, asking that all flags be flown at half-mast to pay respects to the victims. In a speech he said, quote,
"In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America."
However, much like Patrick partially anticipated in his manifesto, this backfired for him. Twitter hashtags like white supremacist in chief hit #1 on the trending as people chastised the president for his past comments about immigration, and angered much of the internet after partly blaming the attack on violent video games, a view he shared with Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. These comments from the pair were especially strange, since Patrick barely seemed to have mentioned them before. And several funeral homes, both in El Paso and on the other side of the border near Juarez, announced that they'd be waiving expenses for their funeral service as a show of solidarity for the shooting's victims. Some of the victims' funerals were also open to the public, allowing in anyone who wanted to attend, and quite a few people turned out to these ceremonies to show their respects. While, as I mentioned prior, many killers of this nature don't usually stick around to face trial by this point, Patrick was one of the rare cases where justice was still an option here. Unfortunately for the victims, his trial was going to be a rather bumpy road. The arrest warrant for Patrick was dated August 9th, 2019, 6 days after the mass murders. Once the warrant was fulfilled, he was indicted on capital murder charges on September 12th by a local grand jury in El Paso where he committed his crimes. His arraignment was then held on October 10th, where he surprised everyone by pleading not guilty to the murder charges, even though there was a huge mountain of contradictory evidence that completely incriminates him, on top of the fact he had already previously confessed. And then another murder charge was added to the list when his final victim, Jorge Garcia, passed away in the hospital after 9 months of clinging on to life. District Attorney James Esparza indicted Patrick back in September, but the following year he did not seek re-election, and instead the position of power was transferred over to Yvonne Rosales, who was elected in 2020 to replace Esparza. And it was under Rosales that allegations of her mishandling the case would crop up. Significant delays plagued the court proceedings, and rumors spread of her and her staff threatening victims arose. And while her alleged mishandling of the case was somewhat unique to the course of the trial, the sheer scale of the case and the amount of evidence combined with the COVID lockdown that occurred shortly after the attack, the legal process was delayed numerous times. And it was during one of these delays that El Paso's district attorney expressed interest in going after the death penalty, which had always been Patrick's fear above everything else. But while Patrick was being charged on the state level, he was also being simultaneously charged on the federal level too. On February 6, 2020, he was hit with 90 federal charges, including 23 counts of a hate crime involving an attempt to kill, 22 counts of committing a hate crime resulting in death, 22 counts of use of a firearm to commit murder, 23 counts of use of a firearm during a crime. A few days later, on the 12th, Patrick waived his federal bond hearing during his first appearance in the federal court, and on July 23, 2020, much like he did for the state charges that were raised against him, he pleaded not guilty. Later that July, it was publicly announced that the federal court side granted the defense more time to investigate a number of red flag mitigation themes, with the federal prosecutors still deciding if they were going to pursue a death sentence. Patrick's defense argued that he had been chronically suffering from a number of both neurological and developmental issues, adding that he was on antipsychotic medication since his arrest, suggesting that he was in a psychotic state during the time when he carried out the attack. During the next few years, the defense and prosecutors continued to argue about the trial, going back and forth about a date, with the defense hoping for March 2025 or even later, and the prosecution wanted it over with in June of 2023. The reasoning the defense provided for pushing the federal trial back 5 years was that the prosecution's date didn't give nearly enough time to comb through the 1.76 million files and 763 gigabytes of video pertaining to the case. Things were further complicated when the defense expressed that they were interested in pursuing an insanity plea. And while the trial was slowly inching forward among these delays, the El Paso Healing Garden at Ascarate Park in Mission Valley was dedicated to the victims of the shooting in August of 2021, and then by that December was also designated as a national memorial. On July 1st, 2022, the judge overseeing the state's prosecution criticized the at-the-time District Attorney Rosales for announcing that the state was going to be trying Patrick, and responded by issuing a gag order, silencing everyone connected to the case from talking about it. And on December 15th, 2022, Rosales resigned amid growing allegations of her and her team's misconduct, with the county attorney even seeking to suspend her from office. Texas Governor Greg Abbott then appointed Bill Hicks to replace Rosales, who, like his predecessor, said that he would seek the death penalty for Patrick Crusius. But on January 17, 2023, the federal government chose not to pursue capital punishment in their case. On February 8, 2023, Patrick finally pled guilty in the federal case to the 90 murder and hate crime charges against him as part of a plea agreement his lawyer struck up. And on July 7, 2023, he was sentenced to serve 90 consecutive life sentences. And with the federal prison system not having parole, he was guaranteed to spend at least the rest of his life in prison. But the death sentence was still not off the table for the state's charges, leading to Patrick's defense saying, quote, "Today's federal sentencing ensures that Patrick will leave prison in a coffin. The only question will be whether it's on God's time or on man's time." In late September 2023, court records show that his attorneys in the Justice Department reached an agreement over the restitution amount of $5.5 million, which Patrick agreed to pay to his victims. Despite this, there was no indication that he had significant assets, given that he spent most of his young life unemployed, had dropped out of community college, and did nothing much to make money. In 2024, Bill Hicks lost the election for the district attorney position to James Montoya, partly due to the fact that his tenure was mired with its fair share of controversies, since Patrick's lawyer claimed that Hicks was trying to use the case to retain his seat in the election he ended up losing, and knowingly oversaw his administration mishandling key evidence in the case. And unlike all of his predecessors that handled Patrick's case before him, James Montoya chose not to seek the death penalty in exchange for a guilty plea from the gunman. And although the federal case had already wrapped up, the state side was still dragging on in October 2024, after the judge presiding over his case issued a series of orders, like allowing Crusius to receive medical treatment, instructing the El Paso County Jail to, quote, preserve and not destroy or alter any surveillance tapes of the gunman in his housing location, and other such questionable demands without notifying prosecutors. Now District Attorney Montoya filed the appeal. The appeal was heard by the Texas 8th District Court of Appeals, who sided with the DA's office in December, ordering the judge to vacate the orders. On April 21st, 2025, in a courtroom packed with nearly 100 relatives of the victims, Patrick pleaded guilty and faced a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. But there was still one more issue plaguing the long-delayed trial: the jail Patrick would be confined to. See, given that Patrick's heinous crimes were tried by both the federal government and the state, the two sides disagreed over where he was going to be kept for the rest of his life. At the federal sentencing, the U.S. District Judge recommended that he serve his sentence at the federal Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, which is considered to be the nation's most secure prison that has housed terrorists, mob bosses, and other notorious criminals. But at that time, the state had yet to sentence him, so it was unclear where they were advocating for him to be incarcerated, and ultimately, the federal judge's recommendation was not binding on the Federal Bureau of Prisons. One of Patrick's defense attorneys said he'd prefer that his client serve his life sentences in a federal prison, saying, quote, I don't think he has the social skills to survive in state prison, and that's really why the defense wants him in Supermax, because it's a more secure prison, but I think he'll be safer there, because I do think he has a big target being a high-profile individual. Regardless of this, after the two halves of his trial reached an agreement following months of back and forth, they decided to incarcerate him at the Lewis C. Powledge Unit, a state prison in Palestine, Texas. Now, before I mention that some of the HN community was supportive of Patrick's extremism, while others were more divided and viewed his paper-thin manifesto less than favorably. And in August of 2019, early iterations of a meme titled Poljak, or Le Poleface, originally appeared on 4chan, meant to depict the cliché appearance of the average Pole user, who are usually regarded as incels, far-right shooter types. The meme was traced from a photo of Patrick's around the same time the shooting occurred, but at this point in the now popular meme's evolution, it had yet to be tied into the Wojak format. For any of you who might not be familiar with the Wojaks of mainstream internet meme culture, here's an oversimplified rundown. In the early 2010s, a particular breed of webcomics quickly rose to popularity due to their simple and marketable characters, who were often crudely drawn in Microsoft Paint and had over-exaggerated faces to comedically express rage. Somewhere along the timeline towards the latter half of the decade, these rage comics were further simplified to one frame, came to more closely resemble human faces, albeit in a way that abridged a lot of the details of human expression and embellished their emotions. These were initially known as the Feels Guy in the early years when it referred to one specific character, but due to their easy marketable nature, many more faces were created to satirically mock certain people and certain types of people on the internet. And eventually, the collective understanding of these similarly constructed characters expanded beyond the Feels Guy and became known as Wojaks, an umbrella under which all of these faces fall. The Poljak soon intersected with the popular Wojak format on BunkerChan, basically a left-wing equivalent of 4chan, in late August 2020. This variation of the meme was originally known as the Poljak and later simultaneously as the Chudjak. After this meme gained the attention of the Pol users on 4chan, it was meant to make a mockery of. Some of the regular users of Pol conducted a raid on October 1st, where they spammed BunkerChan with grotesque imagery not suitable to display on YouTube. This raid continued for approximately 3 days, and slowly faded out after moderation stepped in to quell the attack. Ironically, this clashing was due to Pol users seething that the Poljak meme was not an accurate representation of their culture. And to demonstrate this, they decided to rage and viciously attack a group that in their mind had ruined their whole reputation, to prove they were nothing like the vicious attacker who targeted a group whose offense was largely imagined and all in his mind. But this interaction, however destructive, spawned numerous iterations of the meme within a short span of time as the communities engaged in their violent exchange. This incident saw Lefty Pol mentioned more than 80,000 times on the /Pol boards and produced over 1,000 shitposts of spam made by the raiding Pol users on BunkerChan. And in further retaliation for the seemingly innocuous, if stereotypical Chudjak meme, Pol users tried to reappropriate the Crusius-inspired Wojak to depict the typical left-winger, completely missing the point of tracing the pictures of a real-life far-right shooter into a meme. In response to this, BunkerChan users produced even more memes mocking /Pol, especially now that they were coping and seething through their lefty Pol memes. The phrase "billions must die" has been widely misattributed to the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, Charles Schwab. The belief that billions or millions must die has been brought up in connection to depopulation, a deliberate reduction of the human population size, theoretically to make human life on Earth more sustainable. Most often, it's a phrase adopted by the alt-right to encourage an ethnic cleansing of sorts, as a way to help reset the world, reflecting conspiracies that the diversity of postmodern society has tarnished the world, and the only way to reverse its consequences be mass murder. And with the underlying sentiment here being a hatred of the perceived havoc that today's society has brought onto the world, it shouldn't be surprising that this phrase was soon tied in with another similarly minded one. The West has fallen. This particular catchphrase references the Great Replacement theory, the conspiracy that drove both Brett and Terrence and Patrick's crimes. In 4chan, this phrase was appropriated on /Pol and other image boards, in addition to more mainstream social media, to suggest that the global elite's replacement of the white race with non-European ethnicities led to a watering down and ruining of Western culture. This gained particular popularity among racist shitposters and trolls who wanted to throw out absurdity into discussions of immigration politics in European and other predominantly white countries. In September of 2022, an unknown Wojak party image board user posted a Chudjak who was depicted wearing a shirt that read "Billions must die," marking the first intersection of this phrase in the meme. This image was quickly spread throughout the shardy and then later extended its reaches outside of the site. A few weeks later, the pairing reached the mainstream as more Chudjak "Billions must die" memes were posted onto Twitter, iFunny, and much of the wider internet. By early November 2022, the Chudjak then gained an association with the "West has fallen" catchphrase, and by December, both phrases were used in conjunction with the character, most notably on Twitter. Immediately, this spawned thousands of memes copying the template and parodying the meme by implementing parallelism with the original "the West has fallen, billions must die" phrase, which was extremely recognizable and easy to appropriate. But these weren't the only phrases that were integrated with the Chudjak meme, though this time, this would arise as completely independent from the "West has fallen, billions must die." "Nothing ever happens" is a mantra commonly said on 4chan's board/poll to suggest that there are no major global events of any importance that have happened in the past few decades, nor will they happen in the future. 4chan's use of this phrase is dated as early as July 2014, namely the first instance where this catchphrase arose, which stemmed from an anonymous poll user who wrote, quote, "Nothing ever happens in this. I can't take it anymore. Please, God, make something happen. This world is boring as f." In the following years, this phrase rose to prominence, gaining usage as a response to both an apparent lack of recent major historical events and other expected events not occurring, offering itself as the polar opposite of "it's happening" doom posts. By early 2024, the phrase had jumped from 4chan's forums to Twitter, as is seemingly the most common step in the evolution of up-and-coming memes. Here, it immediately became integrated with the Chudjak character, and initially, in combination with the aforementioned "the West has fallen and billions must die" phrases, before splitting into an entirely different branch of Chudjak template memes. So that's Patrick Crusius and the origins of the Chudjak in a nutshell. I'll spare you my retreading of the case I just spent an hour discussing, and leave you with a few final thoughts instead. First of all, I know I made reference to allegations of some of the district attorneys and judges potentially mishandling the case, but that does not mean that you should ever go out and harass these individuals or anyone else I mentioned. These are simply rumors, allegations that have yet to be proven. It's difficult to dismiss the notion that someone along the line didn't engage in a bit of unsavory fuckery, given the whole trial dragged on for 6 years, but that's not necessarily indicative of anyone's guilt of that matter. The nature of the repeated delays even prompted Christopher Morales, whose aunt Teresa Sanchez was killed in the attack, and his mother and grandmother who were injured in the shooting, to call the handling of the case a circus that was only causing victims more pain. On a lighter note, photos from a few months ago have recently surfaced of Patrick after a bit of his time in prison. Clearly, jail has done some wonders for this man physically, and if nothing else, him spending the rest of his life in prison should certainly give him the glow-up he needed. But all jokes aside, obviously, this case is definitely the darkest one I've covered to date. The havoc this attack and crimes like it have wrought on American society is nothing short of devastating. If there's any consolation to be had here, I think there's some cosmic justice with how 4chan and 8chan have shunned this creature. For as much as I might not like the Green Frog extremists, I can at least appreciate that they saw how desperately Patrick craved their validation and mocked him for it. When he wanted so badly to become their martyr, they made him their meme, and you love to see it. Anyways, that's about all for today. If you liked the video, please like the video, comment, subscribe, everything like that. I've heard YouTube is apparently hiding some of my videos from my subscribers as of late, so make sure to turn on the notifications bell to get notified every time I drop a video. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through, and until next time, Godspeed, bitches. One more thing before I go. I did just want to read out the names of the victims of the shooting real quick so we can take a moment to pay our respects. Oh, sorry if I get any of these names wrong, by the way. Andre Anchondo, Jordan Anchondo, Arturo Benavides, Leonardo Cepedi Campos, Jorge Cavillo Garcia, Guillermo Memo Garcia, Angelina Angie Silva Ellensby, Maria Manoas Flores, Raul Estrada Flores, Adolfo Serratas Hernandez, Maribel Loyo Hernandez, Alexander Gerard Hoffman, David Johnson, Luis Alfonso Juarez, Maria Eugenia Legarrete Rotho, Ivan Filiberto Manzano, Gloria Irma Marquez, Elsa Laboria Mendoza de Marquez, Margie Ricard, Sarah Esther Regalado Monreal, Javier Hermes Rodriguez, Teresa Guerra Sanchez, Juan de Dios Valaquez Cherez. Godspeed, bitches.